Hey watch friends, today we're going to be checking out one that might look familiar. This is from the Malaysian micro brand Revelot, and this is their Hexmariner, now in its V3 form. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the 42mm version, but we'll actually check out through the video some comps of the older version as well as the 39mm size as well. I do want to mention up front, this is already actually live on their website as of time of publishing. I'll of course have a link down in the video description if you want to check that out. Due to some custom delays, this is a bit late to publication, and unfortunately that means some of these are already sold out, so don't waste any time if you are interested in it. But with that, let's go ahead and dive in and see if it is in fact one you're interested in. As far as the basic specs, this comes standard with a 2-year warranty. The case on this particular version, measured from roughly the 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock position, is coming in at 42.3mm. The bezel is pretty much flush, coming in at 42.4mm. The lugs on this version are 22mm. The lug-to-lug is coming in at 48mm, so reasonably compact, and I actually think it wears a little smaller than that, especially with this drop with the female end links you have there. As far as the total thickness, this is coming in at 13.1mm. That is inclusive of the crystal. On a dive style watch, I don't think that's too bad, and additionally, I think because this tucks pretty well into the wrist, I think it wears a little bit thinner. As far as the crystal itself, it is a flat sapphire crystal, and it does feature an inner AR coating. The movement is the same as with the prior variants. This is coming with a Seiko NH35. For those who aren't familiar with it, great workhorse movement. It's going to be automatic. It does have hacking, hand winding. It is a lower beat at 21,600 beats per hour, but I think it's smooth enough personally. And then as far as the power reserve, it does have roughly 41 hours of power reserve. The water resistance is coming in at 200 meters or 20 atmospheres. And then for the weight, on this factory included bracelet here, size to my 6.5-inch wrist, I get a little heavier than their stated spec. It's coming in at 167.1 grams. As a spoiler though, I do actually think it wears its weight well, but we'll come back to that. Alright, so now that we have the basic specs out of the way, let's get a better feel for what this one's like to actually live with. This particular variant is going to be available in 7 primary dials. You're looking at the forged carbon that we have here today. That's both for the dial and the bezel. Additionally, there are some different finishes. So you have a CNC that's new for them that is a white. You have a CNC that's a blue. You additionally have 3 variants of mother of pearl mosaic that we've seen in the past from them. There's a red, the purple came back, which that's gorgeous, and we'll check one out, as well as a black, which I believe is new there as well. And then finally, there's Amazonite, which is a natural stone dial that I hadn't personally seen in the past, but that's pretty slick. You additionally can get some of the different finishes by metal or DLC, depending on the variant that you choose. As far as this particular dial, and we'll spend the most time unpacking this one, if you're not familiar with forged carbon, this is going to be similar, so it's a carbon fiber as the name would imply. However, with the forging process, you get a very different dial effect than you do with traditional carbon fiber. This is going to be more of a marbling kind of finish for it, as you can see here. So that really almost, I think, gives it like a mercurial effect where it looks like kind of liquid melting metal as you move it across in different lighting. And I, of course, have a range of lighting to check that out and get the full experience in effect. As far as the dial layout, you can see it does have printing at the 12 o'clock with their brand symbol and name, and then down at the 6 o'clock you do have 3 lines of text. That's going to bring it in with the Hexmariner name, automatic, and then the water resistance. As you move out towards the perimeter, you can see that this does have a printed chapter ring as well. And then just outside of the chapter ring, there is a very steep rehot. That rehot, as with past models, says Revelot Hexmariner, very subtle, especially with the vertical or almost vertical presence of that rehot there. So it's almost just like the inner case as opposed to a traditional rehot, but I think that's a cool little touch and nod, and it is subtle enough that it's not going to be too garish or anything for those who don't prefer that text. Down at the 6 o'clock position, this does have a very traditional date cutout. You can see that this is going to be squared, though it does have slightly rounded at the corners there to soften a little bit. As far as the hardware, similar to the past models or past versions we've checked out, this is going to have what I would call like a broadsword type hand design for it. You're looking at a nicely applied brushing down the middle, and then it does have polished facets on the outside edges of that. This, I think, really gets some nice light play for it, and it will pick up and reflect nicely as well between the facets as well as the polish. So that gives good contrast and legibility overall, even against this dark dial, especially with having that lume. As far as the second hand, you can see that the second hand here is going to be, again, similar to the past ones. You're looking at a hexagon for the counterbalance, and additionally you have a hexagonal lollipop out there as well. And then this particular one has a red tip, so that gives nice contrast there also. Shifting over to the markers, again, these are going to carry through with the past ones. You're going to be looking at hexagons all the way around. You do have uniform application there, with the exception of the 12, 3, and 9 o'clock position, and they're elongated hexagons. And then at the 6, with having the date window, it of course does not have one down there at all. Shifting over to the Lume application on this particular version is pretty awesome. So you're looking at very strong application on the hands, the markers, as well as the bezel. Additionally, you're going to notice that this does have an infusion for that carbon fiber, so that's only applied to the dial, not the bezel carbon fiber, at least that I've been able to pick up or make hit there. So with that, I think that that's more of a fun accent nod. As you do a fresh charge coming in from the sun, hitting it with UV light, you're definitely going to pick that up. It does fade much quicker, of course, but again, it's just an accent touch. I do think it's a cool little nod and aesthetic for that. Additionally, on the bezel, you're going to notice that this has a dual color lume. Really like that. I think that looks great both day and night. I think that color complements this particular layout nicely. So that's a real cool touch. As you shift across different lighting conditions, you can see that with the forged carbon, and just like you see during the daytime, it's really going to have some cool light play here. So as you transition kind of in and out, and especially with that infusion there with a fresh charge, that's a really cool effect and aesthetic. Not one you're going to bring out all the time, but it is nicely done. And then the crown on this is also going to feature Lume as well. Again, something that's just there as an aesthetic touch and nod, but I do like that, and I think that that's also well applied here. So very much strong Lume performance across the board, but most importantly, the actual legibility in the practical application is going to be very strong. As far as the bezel itself, with being a dive style watch, this features a 120-click unidirectional bezel, and we'll listen to that action here momentarily. The exterior, just like with the past ones, has kind of a scallop cut, but it's unique in that they are pyramids, which really I think ties in nicely with that hexagonal effect, and it's actually reminiscent of the way the dials used to be on the early versions we'll check out. It is full polishing all around that lip, but that's nicely broken up in this case with a very wide forged carbon bezel insert as well. As we already looked at, you're going to see there is a color accent, so they have their signature shield at the 12 o'clock position, and then the 15 minutes, you've got those hashes in there. Do note it only has 3 in between your 5 and your 15 for that, or 5 and 10, and your 10 and 15. As far as the layout there. As far as the numerals themselves, they are nice and bold. You can see very cleanly milled into that, gives you a nice strong lume presence, and overall just a good look. And then as far as the bezel action, let's go ahead and take a listen to that. It definitely has a nice tactile click. It is what I would call on the light side, though I will say with this having polished edges, I don't think that's a bad thing. As you can hear, very, very pronounced click for it. Bezel alignment, I have found to be pretty solid on this particular one. No real back play to note there, so no complaints in that regard. I think it's pretty well done. I usually prefer a little stiffer bezel, but that being said, I would otherwise be complaining about it being too stiff because it'd be kind of slippery on the outside there, so I think they actually dialed it in pretty nicely. As far as the case itself, the case again is going to be reminiscent of the past ones. However, I will say I do think they are steadily getting more refined. So this I really think walks that line between like a dressy, kind of like the Submariner. It's a dressy tool, so it seems very rugged overall, but it does have enough touches to it that I do think it seems like a dressier diver. And you can see that this does have chamfering all along the perimeter here, so that fully frames in along the top edge, really accentuates those angles. The bulk of the case, though, is going to be a linear brushing, so that runs front to rear on the case, and I think that's nicely incorporated. As I mentioned, it is very angular, but the angles, I think, flow nicely. There's no sharp edges to it, and it kind of has like gracefulness to the angles, so I think that walks that line nicely. As you can see, it does have downturning to the lugs. It's fairly arc shape to the case. It does stop a little bit proud of the case back, or short of the case back. However, on wrist, I have not gotten any of that flying saucer effect or anything, and the case back itself is relatively thin, as we'll check out here. As far as the lugs, you can see the lugs, again, carry through with that angular kind of hexagonal effect for that. So it gives a very atypical look, and that, of course, carries over to the end links as well, where they're cleanly integrated there. And then on the 3 o'clock side, it does feature crown guards, which I think is in keeping with the dive style here, especially with that traditional 3 o'clock layout, instead of moving that down to the 4 o'clock position. The crown itself, as you'd expect for a diver, is a screw-in construction. It's measured at 6.8 millimeters, which I think is well proportioned, easy to grab a hold of for this, especially since it definitely is a little bit thick there, though I think, again, it's proportionate to this 42 millimeter case. It is going to feature a coin edge, and then as we already saw, it is milled in there, and it is actually filled with lume, so it's both signed and lumed for that. Shifting over to the case back on this, again, as you'd expect for a diver, is a screw-in construction. It features a prominent exhibition window. It's going to be brushing all the way around, stays with that tool vibe, and additionally keeps from getting fingerprints as much on the back, which is very welcome here. And then you're going to have milling for your text, has a lot of information around that. As far as the actual showcase with the exhibition window, you can see that this NH35 does have a nicely customized rotor, and I think it has a good look to it. Not only the gold coloration, it has kind of that like rising sun effect there for the application of that finish, and then of course has their logo down on there as well. So I think that's nicely done. Shifting over to the bracelet, this is going to be one of the biggest areas that you're going to notice. Beyond the refinement of the watch, it really shifts as far as the aesthetic and style of this bracelet. So you're now looking at, as I mentioned, fitted end links for this, similar to in the past. It does have female for the end links. You're looking at 22 millimeters at the case, and it does taper down to 20 millimeters at the clasp. You're going to be looking at a 5-link construction that they call a flat Jubilee style, but I really just call it a 5-link with a Jubilee kind of layout, in that it does have brushing on the exterior links and then polishing on the interior links and polishing on the chamfer edges on the outside as well. So again, I really think that this further walks that line of refinement that gives you kind of that dressy tool aesthetic for it. This one actually shifts over now, and it is held in with screws. If you don't already have one, I'll have a link to a quality screwdriver down in the video description. Many people are going to welcome that. Do make sure that you follow that guide. If you're not familiar with it, you do want to put Loctite, those kind of things. Make sure you don't strip the threads or cross thread, all that kind of good stuff. The articulation on this, especially with this 5-link design, as I have come to expect for 5-link constructed watches or 5-link bracelets, this has great articulation. Very smooth on the interior, so really nice chamfering and softening of the edges. It just really kind of glides across the wrist, but with that 5-link construction, it has a lot of articulation, lateral, horizontal, all that kind of good stuff, moves nicely. The clasp is another area where they have refined this. So they've had an evolution. Their original clasps were pretty basic in construction. They now have since moved over to a toolless or glide lock type of layout. But you can see the aesthetic, the finishing on this, principally brushed with your chamfered edge there. But then it does have a double pusher. You open that up, you're going to have a milled bridge. They have a different mechanism now for your toolless micro adjustment. So this is not the first time we've seen this style or a toolless micro adjust, but this is a ratcheting effect for that. So you can adjust this to close it on wrist, but you do have to push that button to open it up. But again, that's always welcome in my book. All right, so now that we have a sense for that, let's go ahead and shift over and take a quick look at the 39 millimeter version on wrist, just to get an idea as to what this one looks like. So we have seen the on my 6.5 inch wrist, we've seen the way that this 42 looks. This gives you an idea as the 39. You can see it definitely does have a more compact presence to it overall. And then as you see them side by side, this just really helps you to appreciate and understand the difference between these two sizes as you choose what option's best for you. It's really tough to say because these do wear uniquely, and we'll check that out further as we go through and wrap things up for final thoughts. So with that, let's go ahead and bring in some different comps. As I mentioned, we'd bring in some, this is in older style, so this is one of their, I believe this was a V2, though it's very reminiscent of their original. So this is another 42. You can see, of course, similar sizing, just accepting the color there, and similar layout, except obviously that bracelet is going to be hugely different between that prior Hexmariner versus this. And then again, the clasp, this shows you with the original where it was more or less a pin adjustment, or was a traditional pin adjustment for that, as opposed to the toolless. And you can see just overall refinement, definitely a much more refined clasp. In the bracelet, I think the styling is going to be polarizing depending on whether you want more dressy or if you appreciate the kind of hex links that they had in the past. Here is to bring in just another as far as the 39, and to give you an idea, so this had the more traditional raised as opposed to the CNC milling for the finish on the dial. And then let's go ahead and bring those two in just again to give you another idea with similar color dials. So this is the 39 on the right and the 42 on the left there, just to help you to appreciate how much size difference there is. All right, and then here it is next to another watch. I brought this one in. This is a Zelos Hammerhead. You can see this was another wide bezel option, though it's not as wide as this, and it just gives you an idea of how much that shrinks. So this is a 44mm case, but you can see how much that shrinks down the dial, and it's going to be similar, I think, with the Revelot, the way that it has that wide bezel. And then going the opposite direction, this is a Henry Archer Aqua, and this one has a relatively thin bezel. And you can see, even though this is a 40mm, it actually, I think, has significantly more, not just the light color, but significantly more dial presence than even this 42mm does. So that just helps give an idea as to how these wear. You're definitely going to have the case presence on the 42mm version, but you don't have a whole lot of dial presence. Similarly, on the 39, I think you have sufficient case presence for most, but the dial is definitely going to be smaller than many might expect. So that makes it a little bit of an enigma to try to pick what sizing works best for you. Alright, so now that we have all that out of the way, you should have a much better feel for this watch, but let's go ahead and wrap things up with my personal view of the positives, some critiques, as well as the summary. First, for the positives, featuring now this forged carbon, especially with the infused, this isn't the first time we've seen this, especially in this dual application, but that being said, I think it's really nicely done. I think it fits the aesthetic of this watch. It's a nice look. I hope you can appreciate on camera some of the effect that you get in person, but I think this is very well incorporated. The bracelet, like I said, some I think are going to prefer the look of the original bracelet, but I think this actually works well in bringing in that kind of Submariner, dressy tool kind of aesthetic for it. But most importantly, the comfort is just fantastic. The function of the clasp overall, having toolless now, that is very welcome. So great evolution of this watch in its V3 form. I said we would come back to the weight. This is a watch that it feels like a tool watch. It feels very stout, feels very robust. However, I think it wears its weight really well. It does not weigh me down. I'm not a big fan of heavy watches. I think it's well balanced, and I think it actually feels lighter than it is. I would guess it to be like 145, 150 grams, not the almost 170 grams that it is. And then the Lume, as I already said earlier, Lume, very strong performance here from a functional and a practical legibility perspective, as well as just in general of having kind of those nice accents with the dial as well as the crowns. That's well done. As far as some critiques though, this clasp, I will say, this particular one at least, and this is a prototype here, but it is a little bit tough to push when it's all the way in. Only when it's in all the way, but that first click can be a little bit tricky, so just something to be aware of there. I'm not sure if that's by the nature of the design or if this is just a one-off sample, but it's something I observed. As they've gone for the refinement with this watch, I was expecting that with the V3, they were going to switch over to a Miyota 9 series, and I think it's time for them to do so. While the thickness, they've actually kept surprisingly slim for being an NH movement, I do think that as they continue to elevate this watch as a whole, it's time to elevate the movement as well. Nothing against NH35, perfectly good movement, but it would be nice to see a higher beat option and to get it even slimmed down further. I think that would be welcome for not that much of a cost increase. And as far as the cost itself, this is coming in at $326 to $375 for the early bird pricing, depending on which version you go with for it. That being said, I think that it's perfectly in line with what it is, but I wouldn't mind seeing that bump up $50 or so to bring in that Miyota 9 series. And then finally, the color accenting on this particular version, I really like this like orangish color, salmon color that they have with the bezel. I think that works great with the forged carbon. I wish they would have carried that over to the dial as well. Instead of going with this more traditional red for the accent on the dial, I think that they should have carried that orangish color over. If they could have color matched that, that would have been a nice little chef's kiss there. So where does that leave us overall? Just like we saw with the past Hexmariners, or the several iterations of those, I think this stays true to its originality. Yes, it's an homage to the Submariner, and they don't shy away from that, but they really did keep their original design, keep the original touches for it, while giving you that Submariner kind of vibe, and I really appreciate that about it. Additionally, I think that with each iteration of this, I think they have significantly improved the quality as well as the overall refinement. In the price, while it has also crept up with that refinement, I think it is easily on par or exceeds what you're getting with each of the increases they've done. So I think they're passing that through nicely, and I think it's held on to its value. So there you have it. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you did enjoy it, please do tap that like button. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and give that subscribe button a smash if you want to check out more content. And then finally, drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. Of all these variants, you've got a lot of choices here. Is there any particular one you like? What do you think about the bracelet as far as this style versus the prior styles? All that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching.